Hello, it's Jack Tutor here of Attention Magazine. Welcome to Crucial Listening, the podcast where I speak with musicians and sound artists about 3 albums that are important to them. My guest this time is Ashley Paul, a songwriter, saxophonist, multi-instrumentalist, whose new album, Ray, just recently came out on Slip. Ray is a collaboration with Yoni Silva and Otto Wilberg, recorded remotely. And Ashley's music has always had this closeness to it. She talks about really enjoying music over headphones. This feels like music that plays into that love. It's a kind of music that really magnifies small details and imperfections, tiny charms. And it's a record that also pulls on the experience of lockdown. Obviously a time where everyone's worlds shrunk considerably. And so that sense of closeness and bringing in the shrinking of space and everything becoming closer feels particularly poignant. What I loved about this conversation is that Ashley chose 3 important albums that provide either an uplifting mood or space to breathe during this time. Music is, I guess, uniquely positioned in being able to curate the atmosphere of space, particularly at a time where we've kind of lost the ability to control that to a large extent. So it was really interesting to think about the important album's remit through that understanding. We talk about so much in this conversation. Ashley's up and down history with the saxophone, dance parties in a front room, encounters with butterflies, walking with headphones. This was a really lovely conversation. I had such a great time with Ashley, and the new record, Ray, is fantastic as well. Head over to ashleypaul.bandcamp.com to check that out. And I'll include more links in the show notes as well, and over at attentionmagazine.co.uk/crucial listening. Hope you enjoy this one. I certainly did. This is Ashley Paul on Crucial Listening. Hello Ashley, welcome to Crucial Listening. You have brought 3 important records for us to talk about. Before we get stuck into those, I wanted to ask about your new album Ray, which came out on Slip. So it sounds like, from what I've read, that you felt quite buoyed by the experience of recording Windowflower with your daughter and partner prior to that point, and that Ray started to come together pretty soon after. So to begin with, could you tell me about that transition from like out of Windowflower and into starting to put together Ray?
Yeah, well, it was a really quick transition. I think I basically finished Windowflower and I was like, right, I'm not actually ready to stop making music right now. And I had this idea of the trio for a long time, probably 6 months before the beginning of this year. So at that point, it had been close to a year. And I had been playing with Yoni and Otto separately. They would come around to my house when we were doing duos and we were talking about the album and the trio, and we were kind of making plans to start it in the new year. And then everything sort of, we got ill like in February and March, probably with the virus. We had a lot of symptoms that weren't, right, yes. So we didn't know that we had it. And then now looking back, we think we probably did. But anyway, so then the lockdown started, and at that point I was like, oh, I'm not going to be able to do it. But then once Windowflower happened, I was like, right, Ben, because my husband was home from work and I had extra hands to help with Cora. I was like, I'm going to do this. Do you mind if I just keep going? But then I was quite nervous about it because it was the first time I've actually written an album with other people in mind. And so I sort of I get in this crazy frenzy of like making sure the space in which I'm recording is like absolutely totally perfect. And I was like, okay, I'm going to arrange this all for trio. So rearranged my entire workroom with like the desk right next to I have like an organ that I record on and like my Casio keyboard, and so everything was sort of in this little corner. And then basically once I got everything in place, it just all came together really quickly. Yeah, so I think it took me as long maybe to rearrange the room so it was in the perfect order as to maybe record the album.
That's great.
Not exactly, but I mean, it sort of is that way.
I've heard you mention as well that you could only hear this music with Yoni and Otto in mind. And as you said, you worked with them both individually previously. What is it about these two players that made them right for Ray?
You know, it's a funny thing playing music with other people. I think the most important thing that I find I need is trust when playing with other people, because like all of my music is so incredibly close to me. And being able to feel comfortable to make the music with the people that I'm making it with is really important. And I both love playing music with Otto and Yoni, but also really love them both personally. And I think that those two things were really important. Also, Yoni is just brilliant because he is up for absolutely anything. Like, he played in my last trio, and I was like, with that, I was like, so Yoni, do you think you could like play bass, clarinet, and piano at the same time? And he was like, oh yeah, sure, whatever, you know. And it's kind of the same now. Like, we've just started preparing for a show that may or may not happen on the 3rd of December at Cafe Otto, depending on, you know, where the country stands. But we've started rehearsing for it, and Yoni's like totally pulled out some Roland Kirk style double horn moves to like fill out, you know, like, because we did overdubs on the album, obviously. And I think, you know, the fact that he has all those skills and is like totally open to doing really weird doublings in the band, and also that he can read music, but also like is a great improviser, and his background is, you know, is equally diverse probably as my own, and I really appreciate that. And Otto, you know, a lot of the same things. I don't know Otto quite as well as I know Yoni, but he can play and is versed in like a really wide background of music, and he's happy to play a simple song or happy to, you know, like really shred like an improvisation, or he's happy to do the most minimal thing. And I think he's very sensitive to following the music and the vibe, and I really like that.
Awesome. I mean, it sounds like such a lively record. I mean, I read quite early on that it had been recorded during lockdown, so I must have had this intellectual understanding that it wasn't recorded all in the same space, and you make reference to overdubs as well, but it's such a wonderfully lively sound and like such a rich dialogue going on that it's very easy to defy that understanding and to imagine you all sharing a space. I mean, I understand that you utilize some interesting methods to kind of convey what you were after from both of them. So how did the collaboration actually play out?
Like, how did we record it?
Yeah, or like, how did you convey what you were looking for from the musicians as well?
It sort of really varied from track to track, and also from line to line on each track. I think with Yoni, I often I would send an actual written out part, so there were notated lines. But then usually I would say, so here's this line, can you record this? But also, you know, I hear in this section some improvising, or maybe do you want to try and make these kinds of sounds here? So a lot of verbal cues. And he, you know, honestly, everything he sent back was so spot on that it was amazing. And sometimes even like with Yoni, I was sending him tracks that were literally just like a bass part and not telling him what I had already recorded, not sending him what I had recorded. And it was such an incredible, it was so funny when I would piece things back together, how in tune the things he and I had recorded without doing it together were. I think it just was, like some kind of cosmic brainwaves happening between us. And it was a little different with Otto. So Otto actually, I asked Otto to send me some bass, like ostinatos, just like if he would record a few bits. And so like the sort of repeating bass part on Little Butterfly and maybe on Cross the Ocean. I think maybe he had just sent me those on his own, like had recorded them solo. And then I built the pieces around those bass parts that he had sent. On other ones, I would send him either notated parts or parts sort of like I would play the organ and what I imagined the bass parts to kind of be, and he would make them his own sort of from these sketches of ideas that I had. And also then simultaneously, I would ask him maybe to, add harmonics in certain parts or to improvise in certain parts of songs. And also, I don't think Otto almost ever heard Yoni's parts added in because those came a little bit later. So also, it's just funny how natural sort of everything fell together. I mean, there was some editing, but considering how much information they both sent in, there wasn't that much need to do that much fiddling around, which was really brilliant.
You mentioned Little Butterfly there, which I think is the song in my current acquaintance with this record, which is really protruding as something which conveys. I mean, I'll tell you how I'm receiving it. It may be totally wide of the mark, but about pleading this butterfly to stay, knowing that over lockdown, gardening, and I know you've mentioned gardening playing a prominent role, but so much emotional investment has gone into the garden as a space which you can kind of carve out as your own. And even the fucking butterfly won't stick around after all of that you put in. There's a lot being put on the butterfly, It just felt like such a lovely encapsulation of how misplaced the frustration is in terms of, how we've been writing out this situation, and which means that it's quite easy to just land it on a butterfly if you're going to land it anyway,
Yeah, it was. I mean, I really did. I think the majority of the summer was spent in our very small Catford garden. And I mean, it was very much like I had an experience with a butterfly and came into the house and wrote that song. So
one more question that I wanted to ask before we go into your important records is that I understand that Lost in Shadows pulled on the early stages of motherhood. To what extent does Ray pull on motherhood as well, and how has the presence of motherhood in your music changed, if this is possible to articulate?
I think this sort of actually leads into my important albums for this time. But since becoming a mother, the music that we have on in the house has changed a little bit. We tend not to be a family that will play a lot of nursery rhymes or things in the house. So we still try to play music that my partner and I want to listen to, but we also obviously want Cora, our daughter, to want to listen to it. And so I think there's been, more sort of fun, quote unquote, fun or uplifting music in the house, particularly during lockdown, I think, because, sort of, there was a real need to sort of wipe away all the grimness that was sort of outside of our door and try and create some form of happiness inside. And that led to a lot of dance parties in our house. But I think, Ray is a reflection of a need for some of that playfulness, or maybe a reflection of, I feel like it's probably It's hard to describe. There is definitely a playfulness in it that I think has come as a result of the time during lockdown in which I was, being in the garden with my daughter, having dance parties, or, the fact that like she wasn't in nursery. And so I was playing all the time, trying to be in that childlike thing. Also, a few of the songs are sort of melodies that I would sing to my daughter as lullabies. So actually that I ended up arranging for this album, including the first track, which is one that I've sung for my daughter since she was born, and it's sort of lingered around, and I always kind of imagined doing something with it. And one morning, it was the last song we recorded for the album, the first track, Star Over Sand. And I woke up one morning and just completely saw how it was going to go. And I went downstairs and recorded it, and I sent it to Yoni and Otto, and they luckily recorded the parts really quickly because I was like, just needed to hear it all together. And so it sort of has become an anthem in our family. Yeah, I've sort of roundabout maybe or maybe not answered that question.
Beautiful. No, that's a fabulous answer. And I'm so glad you brought up that track as well. I've been singing that all around the house. My wife has been joining in. She's not even heard the track, but based purely on my humming. So it is a strong melody. It's fabulous.
Thank you.
So let's talk about your important records. As you say, that's a really nice way to lead into talking about them. I mean, I'll let you pick whichever one you want to talk about first, if you give me the name of it, and then a little bit about why it's important as well, why it has been important.
Maybe we should talk about I, Jonathan by Jonathan Richman first.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Cool. I think back to sort of the dance party aspect, all of these albums were albums that sort of fulfilled a need during the lockdown. So they were important in different ways than maybe, like being really fundamental in my evolution as a musician or human being. But they've been really sort of nonstop presence over the last 9 months. And this one in particular, Jonathan Richman was actually not on this album, but his song Little Dinosaur was one of my daughter's favorite songs when she was about, I don't know, just between 1 year and 2 years. And it used to be on constant repeat in our house. And I didn't actually know Jonathan Richman until she was about that age, so about 3 years ago, maybe 3.5. And I think I was definitely at Cafe Auto, and I was trying to think of who was playing. It was either Fielding Hope or Will from Yeah You. One of them was DJing, and Jonathan Richman kept coming on, and every time he came on, I was like, who is this? This is so great. And, that was sort of my introduction. But also simultaneously, my partner had sort of started playing Little Dinosaur, and it was a weird kind of thing that he had just kind of appeared in my life, and I had just fallen in love with him. And a lot of these songs sort of have been favorites of my daughter also that we end up dancing to, like, I was dancing in the lesbian bar, that one, and That Summer Feeling, obviously, and Parties in the USA. I really love just sort of the simplicity and the joy, and I guess like the emotional, I don't know, I was trying to think of what it is about Jonathan Richman and how to put into words sort of, it's a similar, I find with him like a similar kind of joy that I find in listening to like Marshall Al-Hashbaz, where it's, right. I don't know,
yes.
I don't want to, by saying like, simplistic, I don't want to take away from the music or something, or like naive isn't even the right word, but there's something in it that just feels so honest, I guess. And they're not trying to sort of be, I don't know, it's not too serious, and I just have fallen in love with it. But it's something that there's sort of an honesty in it that I strive for in my own music. And with him, I really admire that. And I also really admire just that he's able to sort of bring joy into the music. And yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I watched an interview with him just before we recorded, where I think the interviewer as well was trying to find the right terminology to use that didn't sound derogatory to describe what it is that he's bringing into the music, which is kind of ironic, isn't it? Because you use the terms like simplistic, which feels kind of spot on. Did it not have connotations of sort of downgrading the music?
Exactly.
But it's not you can't get the right term, which means that it's inherently kind of complicated in that sense as well. It's
totally. Yeah.
I'd never heard of Jonathan Richman. Another thing I found really interesting is the fact that it's kind of like that Summer Feeling track is kind of dark as well.
I know, yeah.
But he's sort of reflecting on almost like his own compulsion. This is what it felt like, again, on first glance, but reflecting on his own compulsion towards the sounds of, like, I don't know, the 60s, or felt like a lot of Beach Boys in there. Obviously a lot of Velvet Underground, right?
Yeah, definitely Velvet Underground. But I'm like the worst person to ask about any kind of musical references of other people because my brain does not categorize music or like connect to music in those ways.
Oh, interesting.
At all. Like, not at all. Like, it's really weird. But anyway, so reference points, I know that it sounds and exists as something that I have heard, but it's a weird sort of block in my brain that doesn't allow connections.
I mean, it probably as well allows for like something to just be kind of appreciated in its own right.
I like that, yes. I appreciate it in its own right, exactly.
And has this led you into hearing more of Jonathan's music, this record?
Yeah, I mean, we listen to a lot of him around the house, and not always necessarily albums, but a lot of songs of his have become sort of anthems around our house, including, Little Dinosaur and Ice Cream Van. And I mean, there is like he does do some children's songs. So there's like something, it strikes a good balance in my family as being music that the whole family can love, which is a nice balance to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you have a favorite track of your own as well?
On this album?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it probably would be That Summer Feeling, I think. Although we do listen to I Was Dancing in the Lesbian Bar a lot. So that one's often in my head because it's quite catchy. But I think That Summer Feeling might be my favorite, yeah.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. And has your daughter accrued any other favorites as well?
She really likes I Was Dancing in the Lesbian Bar and sings that one a lot, which is pretty cool. Yeah. Maybe Velvet Underground is good too, and Parties in the USA. Those tend to be, the highlights, I would say.
I was dancing in the lesbian bar. Ooh, ooh, ooh. In the first bar, folks were drinking sips, but in this bar, they could shake their hips. In the first bar, they were drinking sips. In this bar, they could shake their hips. And I was dancing in the lesbian bar. Oh, I was dancing in the lesbian bar. Ooh, ooh, ooh.
Let's talk about your second important record now, Ashley. Again, if you could give me the name of it and a bit about why it's important too.
The next one I thought to include was Duke Ellington's The Nutcracker Suite. I mean, Duke Ellington has sort of been a big part of my life for a number of years. I grew up playing in big bands, so I sort of grew up playing his music, but it wasn't really until I was in my 20s when I was studying with Anthony Coleman that I sort of developed sort of more of an adult appreciation for him and really started digging back into his music. And Johnny Hodges became like a really, really big influence in my saxophone playing around that time. I absolutely love him. And I have to say, debating between this and Afrobossa, which is also probably, Afrobossa is probably my favorite Duke Ellington album, but this was recorded around the same time. And this, since I was going for like the lockdown theme, this one actually has probably been playing a lot more, mainly because my daughter's really into ballet. I started playing her the Nutcracker suite, like the Tchaikovsky Nutcracker suite, a while. And actually, I was searching on Spotify or something. I say grimacing. This popped up, and I think, maybe it was about a year ago that this, and I didn't even know that this existed. And I put it on, and I just sort of, we all fell in love with it. And I think it ticks a lot of things that sort of have been really important to me in my own music. Like, I did my master's degree in contemporary improvisation, but the department where I went was founded by Rand Blake, who is the pianist, and he had called the department Third Stream originally, which is what the department was known as for many, many years. But Gunther Schuller had actually coined that term to mean, like, if you combine two genres of music. So originally it was jazz and classical music, you get a third stream of music.
Right.
And that sort of idea of crossing boundaries of, what's classical, what's jazz, what's popular, and noise, even in different sound aspects of music, the idea of sort of meshing these in my own music has been really important. And this is such an early example of it. And I just don't know how you couldn't hear this and not fall in love with it.
Right. Yeah.
It's just brings me joy to listen to this album. I think the arrangements are there's so much sort of like play in the actual arrangements, which were actually done by Ellington and Strayhorn together. But again, this was a big part of our dance parties in our house. So, yeah.
Tell me about these dance parties. Are we literally just, right, let's crank the music up, let's all dance?
Yeah, pretty much. It tends to be a post-dinner activity, because there's usually like music on during dinner, and then maybe like a favorite would come on, and then it's sort of like, all right, let's get going. And also, I don't know, but they did. It's not always an evening thing. They do have a lot of afternoon dance, and also I have to say, like during lockdown, especially, like, the 3 p.m. glass of wine or whatever it was, the drinking started happening earlier and earlier, which meant usually the dance parties started happening earlier and earlier.
That's great.
But yeah.
Yeah. I can totally see boogie into this hard. Like, I had it on while I was working. I swear I was typing a bit more jovially, just having it on. Because you mentioned about this third stream. It feels like something maybe quite precarious with a record like this, where it could sound so gimmicky and forced if it kind of takes the wrong turn. I don't know.
Absolutely. I think it's treading on a really thin line, but it's definitely like so good, like ended up on the so good spectrum of that.
Yeah. I don't know what how it ends up in one camp and not the other, but it feels to me like it's like this potential arrangement was kind of sat dormant within the original, and it just needed coaxing out, rather than being like, let's swing this up a bit. It's just so good. I don't know whether that's because like the original is so staccato and precise and like rigidly rhythmic, as a ballet, and all it needed was to have its limbs loosened and this would come out. It's really cool.
It is really cool. It definitely feels as though the first limbs were loosened. Yeah.
So you mentioned that Duke Ellington was something that you came into through playing in big band. Did you enjoy the music when you were playing in big band? Because I know that personally, when I've had music that I've encountered through playing, in bands, and it's something that's put in front of you to play, it's not necessarily something that you then go on to like enjoy, because I guess it could feel like something you're sort of being asked to do rather than being able to do voluntarily. But has Duke Ellington always been enjoyable to you?
He's always been enjoyable. I think I really loved playing in big bands. Like, I was totally a lead alto big band geek when I was in high school, and I absolutely loved it. But I think there is an aspect of it where, sometimes you need to come to things on your own terms or in your own way when you're ready to find them. And I always really liked his music and respected him, but I don't think there wasn't sort of that like personal joy from it. Like, at the time that I was playing in big bands, which was very un-big band, like I was like obsessed with Paul Desmond. So Paul Desmond was like what I wanted out of music, whilst at the same time, like, refining my lead alto tone and things like that. So they kind of conflicted with one another. And there was things I learned from playing Duke Ellington, like how to actually swing, and I really enjoyed like on that music that it gave the chance for the band to actually like, because a lot of the music is so simple, at least that we were playing, like to just like really focus on the vibe and the swing and like getting the feeling right. But I think like as far as like digging into his music on my own, it wasn't like I was really playing Ellington records at home. I was playing Paul Desmond records at home.
Yeah.
And that didn't start really. I mean, it's sort of two things had happened, like when I was in my 20s doing my master's degree, I sort of was getting into Johnny Hodges on my own because I really was copying what he was doing as far as like the vibrato and like the bending into notes. And like, I just was transcribing a lot of Johnny Hodges at the time to sort of learn how to bend pitches in the way that he does. And sort of simultaneously like studying with Anthony Coleman, and his love of Duke Ellington was really infectious, and developed a love for him sort of through those two avenues.
It feels like a nice chance to also ask about your relationship with the alto. I mean, it sounds like you've been playing that for many, many years. Are you still feeling your relationship with the alto saxophone changing, developing?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. This album in particular, well, I think about, yes, to answer that question, yes. It's a very long-winded answer, but I sort of have had, I don't know, like a struggle with the alto saxophone since I first went to conservatory when I was 18, and I sort of went in with an idea that I was going to be like the next great jazz saxophonist. Right. And about 2 years into my degree was like, fuck jazz, it's like a dead music and it's not going anywhere. And what am I doing with my life? And I sort of became really disillusioned with all of sort of what jazz stood for. Nearly gave up the sax. I mean, I finished my degree, but then graduated and packed my saxophone away and didn't touch it for a year, and was doing a lot of visual art. Then I moved to New York, and I was really poor. And so I actually, Matsna Roberts and I went to school together, and she was like, oh, I've been busking in the subways. Like, why don't you do that? And I was like, all right, I'll give it a try. And so I started busking in the subways in New York. And basically that's sort of how I came back to the saxophone. And so I was doing that for about a year, like 5 or 6 hours a day, and paying my rent in coins. And then I decided to go back to New England Conservatory to get my master's degree, and like really, really fell in love with the saxophone again, and like really fell in love with music, and was starting to sort of develop the beginnings of sort of what my music is now. But then again, like I sort of went off of it for a while when I first started recording, and I think I was sort of very interested in sound. I'd been studying Cage and Feldman, and like space and sound became really more important maybe. And then slowly over the years, it's sort of been coming back. But this album in particular, and I've been feeling, I think because my live sets have become increasingly more saxophone centered, and really like doing a lot more improvisatory like sections and parts of my solo sets live. And then I just really wanted this to be like a saxophone forward album. And I mean, I don't know how like it is being interpreted, because I think that my idea of like what all of my albums sound like I don't know, I'm too close to it to maybe be able to see it. But like, yeah, I'm really happy that the saxophone feels like it's much more a part of this album and like much more at the forefront, both melodically and, the improvisation. And I think in a way this band has kind of made a full circle to some of the music that I was writing when I was doing my master's degree, and I had a quartet at the time. But it's sort of like this, I don't even, mix of popular song and maybe jazz elements and, everything, whatever else mixed in. So.
Yeah. You talked about this idea of, the third stream being important in your music or featuring, heavily in your thoughts. Do you have any thoughts on why that's particularly compelling to you?
Because when I was young, it was definitely jazz that I loved, but I think it also maybe ties into the fact that I can't like categorize music by genres in my head. I've always I've never defined boundaries in like the kinds of music that I liked. So it's, I think, always been really varied. And I think because those boundaries aren't there so much in the way I think of it, like it doesn't make sense in my own music to create those sorts of boundaries. And it wasn't so much like I don't think it's so much consciously that I was combining these elements. It's just like all those elements are actually a part of me, and that's what I hear, and that's how music to me sounds, I guess. And, I think when I went to NEC and like the idea of third stream was presented to me, that really resonated a lot. But also at the same time, I was sort of like, I think it resonated because it was already kind of internalized in a way, maybe.
I want to pick up on something as well that you mentioned when you initially went to study with the sax and you had that moment of being like, fuck jazz. It felt like something where, I dabbled last year before in learning the soprano, having not had any woodwind experience, but got really into jazz prior to that point as well in the kind of 2 years running up to it. And I felt, this is obviously very different, someone like me who's having a little dabble and you who spent, a lot of time studying with it. But I felt like that the stories and mythos around jazz, there are people who, who are right at the pinnacle of jazz, your Coltrane's and people who clearly practiced all the time, were relentless about what they do. And I almost felt, as I was just starting to squawk out the Pink Panther and stuff, I was like, if I can't get to that point, it's almost quite disheartening. Like, is there a place in the mid ground? And it kind of felt quite disheartening to think about that. Where did the kind of like, oh, screw this, it's a dead music come from? Was it kind of that kind of place or what was playing into, wanting to push back originally?
Yeah, I think it's tricky. I think there's might be an element of that, because I think what I wanted out of the saxophone was never to be that really virtuosic saxophonist. And I think I didn't, technically, I guess I'm fairly good at the saxophone. But at the same time, like where I went to school, there were saxophonists that, they spent all their time practicing licks in the practice room. And I just, that wasn't something that, and I did do that for a long time. But then I just sort of got to a point where I was like, what I really like is to play melodies. I really like making sounds. I'm really interested in like, harmonic possibilities of the saxophone. And I was confused. I mean, I think also there's, in addition to sort of that aspect of it, there are parts of being a female jazz musician that were not comfortable for me. And I think NEC was really good for it for the most part, but I didn't do very well with sort of that like very macho kind of like cutting sessions that, like, I don't know if you know what I mean, but like, those types of things. And I did experience some problems with sexual discrimination. And I think, all of those things combined together to sort of paint a picture of a sort of scene that I didn't really want to be a part of anymore.
Yeah, fair. I mean, yeah. I remember watching Whiplash just recently, and that paints, I don't have any experience in jazz academia, but paints a picture of like an incredibly machismo-driven environment in which people are learning jazz.
Yeah, I haven't seen that, but it's it is present,
Yeah.
or it was present. I mean, at the time I did my undergraduate degree, I was the only female instrumentalist in the undergraduate department, and Matsuno was the only master's female instrumentalist, I think. So it, in a department of however many people that was, it was not always, there were vocalists, but not other instrumentalists. So it was intense.
Yeah, I bet. So if we were to play a clip of this record, the Nutcracker suite here, is there a particular part of this suite that appeals to you most?
I would say either track 2, Toot Toot Tootie Toot, or number 7, the Chinese dance, the Chine Soiree. I don't know how to pronounce that, Chinese dance.
Great. Well, Ashley, let's go to your third important record now. If you could give me the name of it and then a bit about why it's important to you as well.
The last one is Joshua Abrams and the Natural Information Society, and the album is Mandatory Reality. This one sort of was important in the lockdown for really opposite reasons from the others. I didn't know about this one at all until the lockdown, but a friend of mine had made me like a 12-hour lockdown mix tape, and
Wow.
the track Finite from this album was included on that. And, when I first listened to the 12-hour mixtape, it was sort of on in the background and we were just kind of listening to it. But then I had dumped the whole thing into my iTunes. And one day I sort of was just clicking through things that I didn't recognize. And I turned this on, and I was making I've been doing a lot of drawing lately. And I was making sort of a playlist in which to draw to, and like put this into the playlist, and it came on, and it came on while I wasn't really paying attention. It sort of was like sitting and drawing and trying to get into the moment doing that. And this track Finite came on, and I sort of just like stopped in my tracks, and I just sort of was like, I sort of felt like instantly that this was my favorite thing I'd heard in a really long time. And it has sort of been on in our house almost every day since that, which was like a couple months ago. And I think opposite reasons of maybe Jonathan and the Nutcracker suite, which kind of brought me joy and maybe kind of picked me up when I maybe was feeling a little bit down. This one sort of gave me space and allowed me to actually to sort of take a breath, which I don't know about you, but I think just sort of finding space to breathe right now has seemed really challenging. Like,
Yeah.
it's just like everything feels so incredibly overwhelming to me with like the state of the world, not only because of the pandemic, but because of, the amount of political shit that's going on, and, and missing my family and other things. So I think this sort of has brought me a great amount of calm. And I think the musicianship is just lovely on it, but the space that this album has given me has been a real gift.
And have the other tracks spoken to you as intensely as well as Finite?
Well, to be perfectly honest, the one that doesn't resonate in the same way is Shadow Conductor. And the other 3 tracks I really like feel connected to. I think maybe because it's has a different kind of like a pulsing dissonance, that the tension in that one is maybe too close to like my internal tension at the moment. But I really like agree a lot. And actually, you know, in Memories Prison, the first, second, and final track, I really love.
Yeah. I only was able to hear I heard a bit of Finite that I could find, but also the first track as well, which is so stunning. Like the way the chords over the top kind of come in and feel.
Right. It's so beautiful. I know I listened to it a long time without sort of really consciously listening, and then have sort of more recently been paying more attention to maybe how they're trying to think about sort of how they're constructing the pieces. And yeah, it's the ensemble itself, just like the comfort, you know, there's sort of the way they sort of each pick out a note from the line and play it, and like are creating the line between themselves, and surely improvise, you know, sort of like improvising within like on those set pitches. But it's really one of my favorite things that I've heard in a long time, and particularly something that's like brand new. You know, and I mean, I think it came out a couple years ago, but you know, new.
Yeah, newer than
I tend to listen to a lot of older music, so yeah. And
obviously, we talked about the fact that, you know, Duke Ellington and Jonathan Richman, it's dance party music. What kind of scenario is this album being played in?
Well, it has been played a lot. Like, I've been doing a lot of visual art, so that was sort of where it first came in. But it's sort of become, it would be like in my workroom where I'd be sitting and drawing, or maybe just crocheting or something, and sort of, you know, taking some personal time. But it has actually come out of the studio now, and will be on maybe while I'm cooking dinner and my daughter is playing dolls at my feet, or, you know, I think it's sort of become a family favorite as well, as far as, you know, it sets a really nice mood for just a calmer life.
Yes.
But it's not like necessarily calm in like a boring way. I think just the fact that it's like such beautiful, repetitive, nothing feels forced in it. And I think it sort of it creates a space in which to be, which I think I tend to be quite, I have a lot of anxious energy, and I tend to sort of, I don't know what the right word is, but I tend to overplan and overthink, and think this kind of, it allows a space to kind of be in where you can maybe just take a moment, and me not be my normal crazy self.
I'm intrigued by this 12-hour lockdown mix. I mean, that's a lovely gesture from a friend.
Yeah.
What else did you have on that mix?
To be honest, I don't even remember, because it was sort of like I put it on, and things have come up since then where I was like, actually, I couldn't figure out what a bunch of stuff was in my iTunes, and I was like, how did that get there? And then I was like, oh wait, actually, that's totally from this.
Right.
But I couldn't tell you specific tracks.
Fair enough.
Unfortunately, sorry if you're listening.
And Joshua Abrams, I mean, was this someone that you'd known prior to this piece? Was this your first exposure to him? Huh.
I didn't know anything about him, and I still I know very little about him, except for that he's, you know, like a bass player from Chicago, and that's kind of the extent of what I know.
Yeah, I mean, I'll edit this out if it's wrong, but I'm just frantically looking it up as well. But I think he played with Martina at a certain point as well.
Oh, that would make sense, because she's from Chicago, so
yeah,
that would totally make sense. Yeah.
So it sounds like from this list of records, am I right in thinking then that really all three records have come into your life, at least in a big way, throughout this lockdown period, and didn't maybe have prominence prior to that point? Is that correct?
the kind of prominence that they do have didn't exist. I think the Ellington, it was probably about a year ago, at most a year and a half ago, that I first heard it. But then, once lockdown started, it became something that we listened to, multiple times a week. Same with Jonathan Richman. I would sort of listen to, tracks of his that were quite popular in our house, but, sort of this album in itself became, in some ways sort of like, the theme music to the last 9 months. And the final one was only really a couple months ago, but I actually think it has really helped me. I practice yoga, and there's a certain kind of thinking, like a space I get into in yoga, which is good for me as far as like calming my head. And I've found that this album sort of, especially with making art, which I've started doing visual art quite a bit more recently, has really helped, me sort of get into that mindset. So they all are very recent obsessions more, I guess.
And so did you're like the listening around the house, like prior to lockdown, the kind of things that you would go to as a reflex, which is what sounds like these records have kind of become, was that a different set of music?
Maybe, yeah. There was always a lot of Captain Beefheart in our house. There was always a lot of Ellington in our house. There's usually a lot of Morton Feldman in our house. My partner has different taste in music than I do, so he puts a lot of things on that I wouldn't necessarily listen to. But I would maybe have listened to more like Bach or Feldman around the house, and sort of quieter music a lot of times, other than like the occasional dance party that we would have to like Your Eyes Are a Blue Million Miles or something. But I think there was a definite shift personally in the need for music that sort of brought me up during lockdown. And I think there was so much outside that was so grating and so hard to fathom that I needed music that simply, like in really simple terms, brought me joy. And that there was no sort of pretext with them. Or even like, even Beefheart kind of became like a little bit, whom I totally love. But even that, I think, sort of became grating in a way, because I just was so sensitive to, became so sensitive to music and sound and like, yeah.
Yeah, Beefheart's quite a jagged character, I guess, to bring into yeah. I remember trading emails with you actually on the back of the interview that you did for Attention. I think it's like 5 years back now. But you mentioned, I think, Tropical Hot Dog being one of your favorite Beefheart songs.
Totally. Yeah, that's a good one.
It's a crazy song.
It's such a good song.
Yeah. The lyrics
I might actually,
oh my God.
I haven't listened to it in a couple of months. I might actually hang up and pump that up in the house.
Yeah, that's a good dance party one.
Totally.
So if you really want to listen to a record, Ashley, it sounds like these have their context and their purposes. Is there an environment or a setup that you have when you just want to listen to something with, as dedicated as you can? Where do you go to do that?
Well, actually, what I've started doing is taking walks and listening to music. And I maybe it's a result of screens and things, like my attention isn't what it used to be, but I've found it lately putting my headphones on and going for a walk for an hour and listening to albums. I think that's right now is my go-to. I really like wearing headphones and listening to music. Like, I think maybe just because the sound goes like straight in, and there's no outside distractions, and maybe just like moving and listening at the same time sort of helps me to focus in. But that I do love a walk, and I do love a walk with music.
That's a great answer. Well, Ashley, thank you so much for speaking to me about your music, these important records, and much else besides as well. This has been great.
Oh, good. Thanks. Thank you, Jack. It's been really fun.
And if people want to check out your music, and I'd implore people to check out Ray as well. Where's the best place for them to do that online?
Well, Ray is on Bandcamp, so probably Bandcamp, I would say, is a good place.
Okay.
Although there was just a preview of Ray up on The Wire, which is also has about like 4 tracks you can listen to now. So
Excellent.
4 or 5 tracks. Yeah.
Nice one. I'll include links in the show notes. Well, thank you once again, and to everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.